September 27th, 2010. I arrived at work not expecting the day to unfold as it did. Instead, I was preparing for what I thought was my first day at Peter Thiel's hedge fund. He had hired me to be a research analyst and to help him out with a class at Stanford Law School. We were teaching on sovereignty and technological change. So I got to my desk and Jim O'Neill came up and said, "Hey, we got to go to Peter's house." Last night on the plane ride back from New York. It's surprising to me that we haven't had more breakthroughs in my lifetime. I was born in the 70s, and as I mentioned earlier, the pace of progress slowed during that time. If you look at energy, if you look at transportation, healthcare, a number of different areas, the rate of progress has slowed. Now,
So, hey, Michael, how are you? If you're doing well?
good. Thanks for having me on.
If you get into the real thing, I'll ask something. When Peter Thiel, you, and Jim O'Neill, the three of you were traveling, going to tech and disrupt in a black limousine. What do you talk about then?
Yeah, so it was my first day of work. That's why I remember the date, and it was so memorable. September 27th, 2010. I arrived at work not expecting the day to unfold as it did. Instead, I was preparing for what I thought was my first day at Peter Thiel's hedge fund. He had hired me to be a research analyst and to help him out with a class at Stanford Law School. We were teaching on sovereignty and technological change. So I got to my desk and Jim O'Neill came up and said, "Hey, we got to go to Peter's house." Last night on the plane ride back from New York, we're thinking about this idea. We're going to pay people to leave school. It's the anti-road scholarship, but we got to announce it today at this big conference, TechCrunch Disrupt. So I had spent some time at Oxford, and I knew many Rhodes scholars there. They tend to be insufferable prestige hounds. They chase, this mechanical lure of prestige. And so they're quite insufferable. Yeah. So I didn't even know what this was, but as soon as it was called the Anti-Rhodes Scholarship, that got me excited. Jim and I started, we walked over to Peter's house. In the prior years, I didn't know this, but Peter had done some research into starting his own university. He had members of his staff research the question. And their conclusions were that it's just not worth it, for many reasons. One is it's just hard to bootstrap that prestige. The second is that, what is this education for? What is college actually teaching people? And then the expense. And then probably the most damning thing is this term, institutional isomorphism. What that means is if you have a cartel, like universities, or it could be other institutions, they tend to force new members to look exactly like them, or they try to prevent new membership at all. And we've seen this with universities. You can't have a real university without federal money. Students need federal loans. Makes it difficult to get a strong student body without that. And then to be qualified to receive those loans, you need to be accredited. So that sets up the next requirement, which is like to be accredited, you have to be like every other university. So basically it's a non-starter. So that morning, I get in a limo with Peter and Jim. We head over to the conference center and we're just talking. I mean, they had come up with the bare minimum of the program, but we were going over, what do we call this thing? How much money? How many years? We get to the conference center, backstage. People are trying to get Peter's attention and pitching things. But we had to really hammer out some more of what Peter was going to say. And to this day, you can go to YouTube and find, if you search Peter Thiel, Sarah Lacey interview 2010, you can see it. And Peter's talking in the present tense, like we have this program underway. I think he says we're accepting applications. And that was my first day. I was backstage, and we launched the fellowship that day. So the Thiel Fellowship in 2010 was a $100,000 grant for people 20 people, lasted 2 years. There were 2 conditions you had to meet to get the fellowship. Requirements, which were, number 1, you had to be 19 and under to apply. And number 2 was that you had to not be enrolled in school. So that was the more newsworthy requirement that caught the attention of a lot of people. In the weeks after that first day, we had Jacob Weisberg over at Salon.com and Newsweek. And right away, they were piling on us, telling us that, we were bad people for enticing, students away from the life of the mind and, only stoking their greed. And that was just terrible. It was silly. But we chose the first class that year. It was a lot of fun, and it started that day in the limo.
That's incredible. You talked about the mandates there for the Thiel Fellowship. Why did you guys put up the mandate that people had to drop out of college or high school?
Yeah, what we were thinking was that there's this bigger theme of stagnation, that outside of the world of bits, meaning computers and internet technology, outside of that, the mobile phone, we haven't seen much innovation. The rate of progress isn't zero, but it isn't what it used to be. And so one of the things Peter had thought about was, what's slowing people down? And one of them is just being in school too long. A lot of people are prepared to launch a business. In fact, now that I've helped people do it, I think you can almost only learn by doing when it comes to entrepreneurship. And so the idea was, could we entice people to encourage them to pursue their passion rather than stay in school, accumulate student debt, and then graduate with obligations that force them to, take jobs that otherwise they might not, maybe they're well-paying jobs, but nevertheless, it's only to pay off those loans. It's very hard to start a company if you have loan payments. It's very hard to even write a novel or, maybe become a screenwriter. Who knows? Like all these dream jobs are only possible if you don't have debts to pay off. So that was the original idea. Since about 2015 or so, they did increase the age now. So I think you can be 22 or younger to apply. And that just, it just became clear that the non-degree requirement was the main one, and the age was really more arbitrary. But I do think it's important also, like, it is a strong signal that you should work on an idea if you're willing to forego this path that everyone else is on and maybe accept, some criticism from your peers and family. I think that's a very hard leap for people to make, but nonetheless, it shows a lot about how much you believe in what you're doing if you make that leap. So we wanted to support those people. And what's funny, I think in 2010, that was still very controversial. And now 13 years later, I think it's mildly controversial. It's not what it used to be, because I think now there are just more and more success stories out there.
You talked about entrepreneurship for students also, and for everyone is learning by doing or building something. What is the groundwork that people should put, students especially, before building something? So
I think it is important to obtain domain expertise. So, long before you start a company, there's got to be maybe you're born with it, but you need a burning curiosity that takes you to the frontier of knowledge in a field. That's for a large majority of tech companies, especially involving any science or what's sometimes, a technological competitive advantage. You're going to have to get out to the frontier and master a domain. So I think if you're passionate about a subject, certainly dive in. It doesn't mean you have to stay in school, but while you're there, I think you should make strong relationships with leaders in the field. These could just be the professors on your campus. I think one of the underrated ways to get a lot out of university is to actually just do a good job reaching out to professors who aren't even your own professor. You're not in their class. I think there are a lot of lonely professors out there, and if they meet someone excited about their ideas, I think they're will encourage you and help you learn. So I get to the frontier of knowledge in a field, understand, and part of that will be to understand what are the unsolved problems in this space. I think it's unfortunate that in our education system, we don't really tell people how limited our knowledge is. I think we're presented this magnificent facade, monument to the knowledge of the past. And in order to get to the top, you're going to have to struggle your way up this tower, and it's going to be arduous and painful. And to be sure, there's a lot of truth to that. But what I think it misses out is all those unsolved problems at the top of that tower are so distant that they no longer inspire anyone. And it makes it appears as though the current experts in the field are unchallengeable authorities. So what I wish instead we did was somehow reverse that, so that, it's like you enter into a department of physics, chemistry, you name it, and on the wall are listed the top 10 unsolved problems, current unsolved unsolved problems in the field. So, to take one example, imagine in the subfield of plasma physics, which is related to fusion energy. There's it's pretty clear what we can't do yet that we wish we could. So we can, and the sun produces fusion every second of the day, but the way the sun brings it about is through the high temperature of the sun, but also the gravity and the pressure. We don't have that on Earth, so we're able to generate this plasma at extraordinarily high temperatures, way hotter than the sun. But then that creates this really nasty, turbulent plasma that we can't quite control and maintain. And so one of the key unsolved problems in plasma physics is this confinement problem. How do we confine this plasma so that we can draw energy from it? The current method is to use powerful magnets, but when you're pouring energy into the magnets, it makes it difficult to extract positive energy from the plasma you're containing. So that's the unsolved problem. So how cool would it be? That was a little long-winded, but it's like, as long as you know that you could win a Nobel Prize by solving this problem, I think that might inspire people. So find out, in your time in school, find out what the unsolved problems are in your field. The next thing, when it comes to running a company, I think there are some rudiments that people can look up. They can read books like 0 to 1. There are a lot more mechanics of startups books. And what I mean by that is, like, anything related to operations can be learned and mastered. That's just like accounting, payroll, these kinds of things. Like, every company has to deal with them. It's not going to be what makes or breaks your company, but it is, sort of necessary. And so you can learn these things. But what you can only really learn by doing is what is it like to work with other people over long periods of time, under great duress, uncertainty, and stress, and maintain your cool, but also have your vision, hire employees, fire employees, create new products. All of this is like, you can't do that in a classroom when it's make believe. You can't just make up some fake widget in a company and then go through the motions, because the true startup is always going to be making high stakes decisions under great uncertainty, with big stakes, emotional stakes, monetary stakes, and I think everything else outside of that. If you're just virtually doing that, you're not really learning. And I think it's that human factor that's the most important. So to rehearse, I'd say get to domain expertise in your field, make a network of contacts of experts, build friendships with your classmates. Those could be your co-founders one day. And then on the side, just, master those mechanics of startups that are available in books, podcasts, and Twitter. You can follow a lot of people on Twitter, and they're constantly giving that kind of advice that I think can be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think if you talk about what you said about even plasma physics in general. There's at the time that we are talking about it, there's the maximum knowledge that a person can have is what the professors or the university professors or the scientists have, basically.
Right.
How does a person surpass the amount of knowledge that they possess?
I think it's very difficult to advance knowledge in the ivory tower for that reason. They make progress, but it's slowed down because in order to be taken seriously, you have to, run through these hoops where you require approval from your professor. And then once you get into grad school, it's your dissertation advisors. Once you get through that, then it's the tenure committee. And you're well into your 30s before you have any freedom to suddenly say, okay, I want to ditch that stuff behind and work on this new problem. So I think, we have seen the rate of progress slow because of that. An economist out of Northwestern University named Benjamin Jones has done some great work on showing how it's just taken longer for people to get started on their career. It's taken them longer to achieve great things. So you see the average age at which things have been done, accomplished, has risen over the last 100 years by 6-8 years. And that wouldn't be an issue if everyone kept working into their middle age. But the sad fact is that people tend to be most creative and productive during, let's say their early 20s to their mid 40s. So if we shrink that window of potential time that people can be creative, then yeah, there will be less innovation in the world, and I think that's part of it. So, like you said, I think it's going to be hard, especially in the hard sciences, to really break out of that system and do unorthodox research. But if it can be commercialized, that might put you in a good position to maybe try it through a startup.
Do you think innovation is a limited resource?
I don't. I think the only limited resource is time. I think if we unleash human ingenuity, we'd be shocked at the discoveries yet to be made that I think are still out there. I mean, that excites me. And I don't think it's beyond the human mind to accomplish. I mean, maybe we add more tools like artificial intelligence to help us out. But nevertheless, I think, think of like the basic unsolved problems of physics. We still don't have a theory of everything. We don't know how to unify the world of quantum mechanics and relativity. So as long as there are big unsolved issues like that, it excites me because it means, that there's still a lot of things we don't know.
But do you think that the scale of innovation or discoveries will reduce over time?
I think there's a concept from evolution that Stephen Jay Gould used to talk about called punctuated equilibrium. And this was used to describe these sudden spurts of transformation that were, orders of magnitude different from, let's say, slow incremental advances. Or maybe Thomas Kuhn had this idea of revolutionary science versus normal science. So for Kuhn, the understanding of things according to Newton, giving way to the Einstein's revolution with relativity, that's a standard paradigm of that revolutionary science switch. It's just a fundamental reshaping of how we see something as large as the universe. Now, normal science, according to Kuhn, was this, incremental advances over time. And so I think in the history of any field, you're going to see both these moments. And so I don't think, there's a sense, according to some, that we're just, it's a world of normal science. It's the end of science. We're going to keep adding incremental advances, decimal points to already existing views, refining current models, but we're never going to have a revolutionary breakthrough on the order of relativity again. And I don't see evidence for that. I mean, given what we don't know about the universe, I think it's hard to say what the correct model will be. So I don't think that's quite right. I do think in the world of normal science, you see a diminishing return to the number of scientists working on things. And that's why there are some people who've written about stagnation. There are some papers out there where, these researchers will point out like diminishing margins to the next productivity of, the next scientist. So it's like the number of scientists required to keep up Moore's laws just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, that's just a fact. That's just normal science to me. But I think there could be a big breakthrough, even in the world of computer processing. I mean, whether it could be quantum computers, it could be a different kind of chip design. There are all sorts of, it could be nano architectures that we can't conceive with materials we don't know about, or old, something like graphite or, something we just aren't using now. That can be a fundamental breakthrough, and that will be the result of a small team, most likely. And so that's why that idea of like the average productivity diminishing, okay, it describes normal science, but to me, it just leaves out this fact that a small number of people could have a fundamental breakthrough that transforms things in a really radical way.
Awesome. So you've been alive for a longer time than me. Do you think the innovation that you have seen in the past 20 years will be the same as what I'll see or we'll see in the next 20 years?
Geez, well, I guess that's up to us. It's surprising to me that we haven't had more breakthroughs in my lifetime. I was born in the 70s, and as I mentioned earlier, the pace of progress slowed during that time.
Yeah.
If you look at energy, if you look at transportation, healthcare, a number of different areas, the rate of progress has slowed. Now, as we've become more aware of that, and this promise of what emerged in Silicon Valley of the startup ecosystem, maybe it is the case that as more and more people, daring teams taking a crack at hard problems, I think, maybe it could be the case that we start to see innovation pick up in the world of atoms. There's only so much you can do if the rules don't change. So with respect to energy, if you think of nuclear energy, I think holds a lot of promise. It's emission-free, incredible density. But for some reason, the environmental movement hasn't appreciated how much safer it is than other forms of energy. It would be great if we had more nuclear reactors, small, large, medium, but because of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the cost of making these things is so high and the time to market so long that it deters a great number of projects that otherwise might have happened. So we might need to change some rules. Maybe that happens in our lifetime. It could be a fight, that I continue to make, and maybe you carry the torch. But on the other hand, I don't want to be totally pessimistic. I think it is within our power to turn the tide and make great advances.
I think I'll go back to the Thiel Fellowship a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, could you guys, Peter Thiel, you and Daniel, you guys build the Thiel Fellowship from the scratch, basically? Would you have been able to do it without going to school or college?
I think it helped me to go to school to see some of the problems. So I thought I was going to become a professor of philosophy. I studied a great deal in school towards that end. But it was during that time that I gained an understanding of some of the problems. First and foremost was probably that slow pace of research problem, that I had to work on things that my superiors cared about rather than some subject matter that I wanted to pursue. I definitely saw that as a limiting factor. And though even in a subject like philosophy, there's just too strict a pattern of what a career in academic philosophy should look like. I think, it's like I did have time in my 20s to learn a lot, not about science. I was studying philosophy. So maybe it could be the case that I picked up some research skills that help me now. But I don't think in a world where I was in a part of fellowship or Maybe Peter had other people. It wouldn't have mattered at that beginning point. I think our unique insights, Danielle and I, have certainly powered the fellowship, and insofar as we were picking classes and so on. But when I think back to what that required, I don't think it necessarily, I needed those hours in the library studying Latin and Greek. So I don't know. It's a tough question. It's like, in some ways, yes, because it allowed me to see the cracks in the ivory tower. In some ways, no. It's always hard to know what the counterfactual is, that we don't know a world in which I didn't go to school. But what I will say is, going forward, things change. I used to use landline telephones too. And so maybe in the past, people used to go to campus and education looked a certain way. For the generations to come, that'll change, and it's not a sign of hypocrisy that I don't use the telephone anymore. It's just there are better available alternatives out there.
What is the ivory tower?
Oh, okay. So that's a phrase used to describe the university. I forget I don't know the origins of that term.
Yeah.
I think it's always used in a derogatory sense. Probably I'm not fair using that. But basically, the ivory tower is this utopian place for intellectuals. I think the ivory is meant to contain, suggest the idea that these people are somehow otherworldly and removed from daily concerns. It's a tower in the sense of also up higher, away from the practical, mundane, earthly concerns of humans. So think of it as like intellectuals up high in a cloud traveling unattached to the earth.
You guys build the Thiel Fellowship. What do you think is the biggest thing you learned from building it?
Well, I think number one was just really refining our pattern recognition for what we look for in founders. And in a sense, it's a lot like deep learning, which is behind computer vision, object recognition, because you're developing a sense of, based on intuition, because you train on this data set. How many people applied to the fellowship? How many do we interview over the years? How many in-person interviews? And what is it like to work with great founders? Like every investor and maybe even founder, for that matter, should have some theory about the right stuff. Some list of character traits that, you think it's not going to be, can't guarantee success, but it definitely contributes to success. And so I think that paradigm in my mind of what we look for in founders was like the most important thing I learned over the years of the fellowship. But it was also the case I had a lot to learn when it came to supporting these people. What are the problems they have and how can we help them solve it? Still struggling with that to some degree, because it could be like the number one issue that our companies have is making good hires. So we're constantly trying to find ways to help our companies source talent. But that's always going to be a challenge. To be a good investor, though, you got to be able to help your companies out and support them. So there, being an investor is part financial, part philosophical, but also part life coaching, because you do need to be a sounding board for people. And so I think I learned a lot about that during the fellowship. I also, and there were surprising things about that. I think when we started, we were too imitative of colleges. We had an application. We asked for things like test scores, GPA, what college you went to. And in the event, pretty quickly, we discovered that was not a good predictor of success. Some things were negative. There was something called the Intel Science Award. It seemed very prestigious to the people involved, but to us, it denoted actually like you're more of a salesperson than a technologist if you weren't that, because you're creating things to please committees. So it tended to be politically popular stuff. So what did we learn is like, okay, yeah, like what the types of people who are good at creative individuals who are great at starting things, they don't look like the Rhodes Scholar, the person who has lived their whole life writing good papers and doing well on tests and pleasing admissions committees.
What do they look like?
I think first and foremost is a level of energy and ambition to do something extraordinary, something different. Tends to be done for intrinsic reasons, meaning they're not doing it to get approved at the higher level, to get the piece of paper that'll secure their future. They're doing it because they just have a burning curiosity, and combined with some level of ambition to change the world or do something exciting. Oftentimes it can be characterized as a type of courage, as a daring, but I think that misses the duration required to accomplish these things. Like when I think of courage, I think it's tends to be like this snapshot moment of leaping into battle, taking a risk when there are high stakes, and that's certainly going to happen. But to me, it's also that sustaining piece where you have to you have to make high stakes decisions like this day after day after day. And there are people who thrive on that, negotiating that boundary of chaos and creation, where you don't want to go too far into the darkness, wasting money on experiments that don't work out. On the other hand, you can't play it safe and just stay in the vicinity of what's known. It's like you got to have the daring to negotiate that boundary between order and chaos. So there's definitely a certain element of that, that most great founders have. Beyond that, there's that sustaining motivation. The reason why tends not to be for money or fame. It tends to be for a deeper purpose, a mission. It can also just be the excitement of being part of a team that you love to be a part of, working on something cool. That's important. We tend to see people who have a interest in a variety of fields. I think that adds a little bit to the creativity. Is if you become an expert in overlapping domains, sometimes you have insights into how these elements of those domains can be combined in new ways. There's something we called insider-outsider. This was from Peter. He's a fan of the work of René Girard, the French literary theorist. Girard has all sorts of ideas about the behavior of crowds, why people conform, why people are picked as a scapegoat by a witch hunt. And Peter noticed that in that scapegoat story, the people who are chosen tend to be interesting individuals. They can either be the hero of mythology or the martyr, someone sacrificed to restore the order in town. Social crisis at hand, this individual is responsible. What tends to be true about those people is that they're not so inside that they are the king's right hand, member of the court necessarily. Like that is too close, too loyal, and can't be blamed. On the other hand, neither are they completely foreign. They're not, that's just someone from a different country, different town. No one, those people could not possibly be responsible for the social crisis at hand. It's only this individual who's somehow in the middle, paradoxically, both insider and outsider. Now that's Girard's theory of the scapegoat, but Peter took that as an idea about creativity and, who he wanted to hire and back and fund. And so, we're constantly looking for that. A funny thing is, I noticed, I wrote a book called Paper Belt on Fire. And in that book, I have a chapter where I go through some of these traits we look for. And then there's a book I also read recently on the real Top Gun. And there was a brief section where these people were talking about, what characteristics they look for in the pilots who have the, Top Gun right stuff. And, of the 8 traits they listed, that, maybe 6 of them were the same type of thing I'm looking for, right? But that what that shows me is if you hired me to work at Top Gun, I would not be good at picking pilot. So we can list out these traits and sort of describe what they mean, but it's really different in real life to try to recognize that in someone. But that said, I wish another part of our school system, oriented itself to cultivating these virtues. Take the courage piece. It's think about how little courage is taught. If it can be taught, it remains to be a mystery. But how do we help people become strong enough so that they're comfortable being the only person in a room who believes something and is willing to defend it. I think that's a very important trait I wish we could cultivate more of, but our school systems don't seem to pay attention to.
Yeah, but yeah, for sure. I think apart from the insider and outsider theory of Peter Thiel, what is the biggest thing you learned from while working with it?
I think it's this philosophy of action. I came from the ivory tower, the university system, which is very much a world of theory. It's a world of, just ideas very far removed from concrete reality, not enough emphasis on experience, and instead more on just, frameworks and models and arguments. So, Peter was part of a team at PayPal, and I was always inspired when I first learned of them that they did not set out to build a payment system. They set out to build a currency exchange, or maybe even a currency itself, something like Bitcoin. They just didn't have the insights yet that Satoshi Nakamoto had in his creation of Bitcoin. But it was that level of action and ambition that was new to me, and so to be around it and see it in real life was, in a sense, to internalize it myself. So this I do think in the battle between action and contemplations, I think we need to find ways that to not see it as a battle, but instead more to see it as something joined as one. And I think Peter and his not through any direct lessons, but more just through my being in his orbit and seeing it in action, I think that was an important lesson for me. I think there are things like the startup philosophy, investing theories, all the sorts of things you read about in 0 to 1, I think are valuable that I learned from Peter. But I think the one thing you can't pass in a book is what is it like to work next to someone, and that was truly inspirational when I came to working with Peter.
You talked about having a bias for action, like Peter did, like the whole PayPal mafia, basically, from Elon Musk to Peter Thiel. What creates this bias of action, and can it be taught in school, basically?
I think it can, but it's not really emphasized. One of the things I notice most about even young entrepreneurs is that they're too theoretical. So they will spend way too much time in a room thinking about who their ideal customer is. And you just got to tell them, it's like, get out of the building, go talk to these customers, find out what their problem is, really understand their needs. And if you can invent something to solve that problem, well, incredible, but you're not going to be able to do it. And there's going to be this iterative process too, once you start talking to the customer, where, it's not just the idea, it gets refined over time. And I think that that refinement can only happen if you get out of the building and truly understand people. So, my first step in bias to action is to tell people to stop making fake business plans or Excel business models, and just get out there and talk to your customers. Danielle has a great saying, actually. She says, don't worry about getting into the next accelerator program, Y Combinator, because your customers are really your accelerator. I think there's a lot of truth to that, because get out of the building and you'll learn a lot. And maybe that simple step of talking to your customers in person too is like, okay, I'm out, I'm doing this thing. That's not just sitting at a desk. There's almost something too passive if you're just on the phone with those customers or doing it over email. I think if you can do it in person, even better. So that would be the first thing, is like, can you just like get out there and start? Customer interviews, good place to start. That's on the micro scale. On the big scale, I would say, you got to look to role models out there who inspire you, and if charge it to the game. If Elon Musk inspires you, that's like Michael Jordan inspiring someone else to pick up a basketball when they're a teenager. So these people are doing things, and so hopefully that inspires the next generation too.
Yeah, for sure. But why do you think did Peter Thiel decide to take the step to invest $4 million in Daniel Daniel's fund?
I think I had, I don't know, it might have been 2 years into the fellowship. That soon, I was already thinking, geez, we're giving out grants. Is there some way we could be making investments? And I tried different ideas, pitching Peter, other people. Is like, could we somehow work this within the fellowship? And it just didn't make sense. It's so hard given the legal situations. Fellowship was a nonprofit. You can't make investments. So eventually Daniela and I hit this crossroads where we had to decide if we spin this out, we have the potential for upside, but we also have the potential to expand in a way that the fellowship can't. If we keep making good investments, then there are more and more people that we might be able to support over the years. And it was truly that opportunity that we thought, we'd take a crack at. It just seemed like too exciting an opportunity to say no to. And so when we pitched Peter, I gather, that's what he thought. We were 5 years into the fellowship and had seen a great number of people come through, and there were people on staff who were running the fellowship alongside us. They could step up. We felt like the fellowship was in good hands. So yeah, it just seemed to be the case. Like if we were going to do something, that was the time to do it. And I think Peter he may have appreciated that we had grown as managers of the program as well, and we're ready to step into this role at 15, 17.
Yeah, you even mentioned Ritesh and other people with Vitalik, doesn't feel all these people who have gone on to build relatively successful companies. What does the mentorship process really look like from you?
I think the mentorship is really, I think first and foremost, you just have to be a sounding board. And what I mean by that is you need a humility to not impose your own view of the world on people. So if someone who's bright and creative comes to you, you can't stifle or constrain their vision. They are the expert in what they are doing. So within them, you have to help them find the answer within themselves to whatever the dilemma is at hand. I think that, sitting back and telling people what to do is just so cheap, and no one should listen to that. It's really just being present and hearing someone out. And oftentimes they just want to go through the options. They might want your opinion, but you should never say, this is the way it should be, because the person running the company knows more than you. The next thing is, I think it's really helpful to have a network of experts. So it's great to be that point of contact for a founder, and they are in some situation that is not unique in the world of startups. Not every startup is the same, but there are a lot of recurring patterns. And so oftentimes if someone comes to us and they're looking for advice, there's nothing better we can do than to say, oh, wow, we know this other founder, or there's this subject matter expert, and they've seen this situation before, and we'll put you in touch with that person. And what I find with creative people and founders is that they tend to want to learn they want to learn how to fight fires when the house is on fire. They don't generally want to learn about fire prevention before it happens. So you really have to be there on the spot and guide them to the resources they need at the moment. But above all, I think there's that humility. I'd come back to this, that you're trying to help someone find the answer that they have within them, and to help them, guide them in a direction towards it.
Yeah. You talked about the firefighting and the firefighting, but I had Chris from Moonrise. He's one of your portfolio companies.
Yeah.
He said the exact.
Oh, interesting. Oh, cool.
It's interesting, and I think how do you make them find the answer within?
How do I say that again? Sorry.
How do you make them find the answer within themselves?
Well, because it'll be the case that they have 2 options or 3 options that they need to think through. And so, okay, let's lay those options out. What do they entail? And then there's always going to be this gut check. Okay, how do you feel about each of these options? What bothers you about option 2? Is it the downside risk? Is it something that just doesn't, sit well with you? So it's really about drawing out those feelings and intuitions about the options they have. That I mean by that, typically people have a clean, pure feeling within them that's clouded over by other concerns. And so if we can just separate these things out and get a better understanding of how people feel, then maybe they can make better decisions, or feel more confident in the decision that they have a stronger conviction on. It could be the case that maybe there are these other concerns with option A, and that involves like, oh, I'm worried about what other people think, or this should not be decisive when it comes to the judgment that's ultimately made. And so I think if they have time with us where they can go through that and just hear our support, like, okay, yeah, don't worry about that, go for it. Then, I think founders come to appreciate that. Doesn't mean they're going to succeed. They're tough decisions and people make mistakes, but you want a good decision process. And I think part of that can just be, the chance to spell out to others what your thinking is on the options on the table.
So do experience people do they really want to mentor young people?
It's hard. I think it's hard. The mentorship word is very heavy.
Yeah.
It implies a active, ongoing relationship, almost like a teacher-student relationship. And so because of that baggage, I think people are reluctant to just say, oh, if a complete stranger says, will you mentor me? That just sounds like too big of an ask. It's like, that's like basically, hey, will you hire me? Or like, okay, I don't know anything about you. So I think, there is this concept of mentorship, but you don't have to see it as a one size, one model thing. I think just think of it in terms of advice. If somehow you do come across a important individual and someone really famous, it's best not to start that relationship with a really big ask. It's not good to say, hey, will you give me a house? So if you have just one specific little piece of advice that you want and you get their insight on it, that's a good first step. But I think the mentors you look for, they could come through programs like, accelerators, Thiel Fellowship, and so on, or even universities. But I will say it's, these things are best felt out over time. I think there's a chemistry to all relationships, including this one. And so, I would say don't call someone a mentor ever. Just, see them as someone, you contact and talk things over with, or get advice and references from.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'll have the last question. At the Thiel Fellowship, when you guys did it's a 2-year program, if I'm not wrong?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So now when that program is over, when the whole fellowship and mentoring part is done, how do you set them free to go and build further?
I think having money was certainly helpful. They didn't get all $100,000 at once. We paid it out in quarterly payments, but that was enough to allow people to get an apartment in San Francisco, maybe get an office. So the money did go a long way to helping people establish independence. I think we had a light structure. We'd meet with people every 2-3 months or so to just go over what happened in the last quarter. What were your goals? What challenges arose? Why did you have to change them? Or what's the new plan? I mean, it was all this sort of stuff we've been talking about. And I think that was enough to give people the room to explore and try things out. We tried to, it was certainly a grant where you had to apply and there's this light structure to it, but somehow we were able to make it feel unconditional, that, you weren't going to be kicked out of the program because you decided to do something absolutely crazy. And I think that latitude somehow translated and helped people support them in a way that maybe, if we had made the grant conditional, like, oh, you got to work on this, and if you're not making progress, you're out. I think that might have been a lot of pressure. So there was a little bit of that magic to it where somehow, even though it is a program and we awarded a grant for certain reasons, it felt unconditional in that if you changed your mind, you pivot, you do something else, we were still going to support you. And that kind of freedom went a long way that, maybe schools couldn't. I think, and then lastly, I think it was just the time. I think being outside of school meant, you didn't have to go to class at 9 a.m. or whatever. And so you could really, if you controlled your schedule, it really gave you a huge amount of time to focus on something.
Yeah, for sure. That's good. I think that's the important part, setting them free.
Yeah.
Bringing them into the real world.
I wish we could help more people on that. I think there are a lot of people who we give out $1,000 grants to people now on the road. I'm always out there meeting people. We can be in the middle of nowhere and we meet someone who needs to buy a few parts in order to build a prototype. And we give out a $1,000 grant. And often that's okay. They love having the money to buy the parts, but oftentimes it's also the case that it's more just us saying, who are these two people from Silicon Valley telling me I should work on this, okay, I got to focus on this. So that has some magic to it as well. Just that sort of recognition that someone else out there thinks you should be doing this.
What advice would you like to all the young builds and founders?
I'll return to a theme that we've touched on a few times. I think courage is in shorter supply than genius. A lot of smart people out there, but they are susceptible to conforming to the pressures of the world, the expectations to do what others are doing. So my piece of advice is be bold, trust that voice within you. I think your visions of what your life could be come to you as visions. Maybe it's like drawing in an artist's studio in Paris, or maybe it's, being in San Francisco and working with a team. But trust that vision and don't let, these outside influences, peers, teachers, whoever, deter you from that. And, hopefully you take the first step.
Yeah. That's an incredible way to end it. But one thing which I like to ask people in general is I've been into startups and VCs since I was 11. What do you think is one fact that would blow 11-year-old me mind?
Yeah, geez. Well, you're not too young and child labor is good.
Yeah, I agree. That's incredible piece of advice. And yeah, I think we'll take a hard stop there.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. That was a great conversation. Hope your listeners enjoy it.